So in this series, Down Under, we are traveling through 5 different areas of Australia, 5 different mindsets with 5 different beautiful beings. And tonight in our series, we are getting to meet the legendary storyteller and communicator of all sorts of history, Miss Jane Ferrari. And Jane's going to join us in just a few moments, but let's just say she's super badass. Don't forget to breathe because you're going to be holding your breath, waiting for the next statement that she's going to make. And Jane is going to give us a little bit of insight, not only about herself, but about South Australia and the Barossa Valley. So sit back, relax, and I'll see you in just a moment. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Core Body Mind. My name is Kat Thomas, and I have just the distinct pleasure and honor, yes, and excitement today to introduce somebody that impacted me and has impacted a lot of humans on this planet. So get comfy, grab the popcorn, grab some s'mores. We're going to take a little journey together, and I think it's going to be unlike anything that you've ever been involved in, unless you've actually met this beautiful human. So we're going to sit around the proverbial campfire together, and we're going to find out how wine is just one part of Miss Jane Ferrari's story. Most recently, the brand ambassador for Yalumba Wines in Australia, because if you didn't know, that's where we are right now. But Jane has influenced a lot of different avenues and aspects for Australia. She has also mentioned of herself, I'm pretty sure this was a quote about yourself, it's kind of like brown corduroy pants. If you hang around long enough, you become trendy all over again. I love that.
That's me.
Yeah, and they're comfy and fabulous. But let's do a quick rundown of just a few of her top hits. So yes, brand ambassador for the oldest winery in Australia that's still running, 170 years old, in Barossa, called Yalumba. You have been a champion for their viniculture, the people, the land, the pride of the winery itself. And you are the best communicator. I think you're the only one that has that title or had that title in the wine world. You've worked with a lot of great legends, but we're going to talk about some of the top 3. Robert O'Callaghan with Rockford Winery. For all those nerds out there, study that one. John Glaetzer, formerly Wolf Blass. And then most recently, of course, Robert Hall Smith, who is the proprietor and CEO of the Yalumba Legacy. In 2004, you received the Wyndham Hill Smith Award as a recognition for your contributions to Yalumba, which you've been with them since 1987. 2012, you were the recipient of Wine Communicator of the Year. That's so badass sounding. I just love that. And that is for education and global promotion of all Australian wines. 2013, you have 2 great things. You were dubbed a Baron of Barossa. So this used to be like just for the boys, rocked that title. And this is offered to people that have really made an outstanding contribution also to the Barossa and their culture and wine. And then also named signatory for Yalumba for the signature Cabernet Sauvignon and Shiraz. So that is just a tidbit because everybody that knows me knows I like to talk, but this is a storyteller that we have, and I'm so excited. So you might want to catch your breath now, take a deep breath in because you're going to hold it for a few moments every time she starts talking. You're a good woman. Ice skates or roller skates?
Well, I'm a big girl, so a bit wobbly on both, but I'd say roller skates.
What is your favorite lettuce?
Oh, iceberg. I'm old school.
Oh my gosh, that's mine. Everybody makes fun of me for it. It's the best one. Fruit or cream pies?
Oh, cream pies. I don't even have to hesitate. I went to oh gosh, the best icebox pie in America. And they asked me out the back, this tiny little diner up Louisiana. up where Elvis started, Louisiana Hayride, Strawn's Eat Shop, the best icebox pie in America, and they took me out the back and let me help make one. Yep, no, cream pie.
Nice. Um, if you were a color, how would others see you?
I like to think if I was a color, I'd be dark blue and something with a bit of depth, yeah.
So the Japanese have a word to describe the daily habits and the practice of those daily habits to achieve contentment, happiness. It's your devotion. They use the word soon. What are certain soons or daily practices that you do to achieve your own happiness every day?
I've been a night owl. I'm a bit of a morning person, so because I've been fortunate to travel extensively, I always like to get, as soon as I wake up, I like to throw some clothes on, get outside and just make sure that I'm there. That first thing in the morning thing, just make sure I'm there, because I'm a bit of a fan of being above ground. So that's one thing. So wherever I am in the world, that first thing in the morning, when generally it's reasonably still quiet, sort of 5, 6 in the morning, and no one's really messed up your day yet. That's a nice moment.
That is
That's
beautiful.
something I do regularly. Oh, that's something I do every day.
I love it. That's a good
Yeah.
lesson too.
Hmm.
What are, say, like 2 words that you have found, and I'll use American since I am one, that has made you giggle when they say it with confidence and it's really wrong?
I think it goes back to just the basic greeting that you get in Australia, that g'day thing. And I see America, that looks like they've been practicing it, and they'll go, good day, mate. And it's like, oh, no. It's, I think it comes from years and years of people being in the outback in the early days, and there's just multitudes of flies. So they tend to talk without opening their mouth. So it's just kind of like, g'day, how you going? And that's it. It's just, it's quite funny to see Americans go, g'day. And it's like, no.
It's from the Outback Steakhouse commercials. I'm sure that's the only way
Yeah.
that they have that.
Yeah. Well, plus the fact that I've never seen a blooming onion anywhere in my world in Australia, ever. There's a place up on the Sunshine Coast up in Queensland called Mooloolaba, and that's a good one if you ever see any of the Americans visiting the Gold Coast or the Sunshine Coast. And it'll be like, Mooloolaba, or nah, that place there, on the beach. That's quite funny. Yeah, that place there. Yeah.
If you had to pick your favorite winemaking region in the world, and we'll take Australia out of the mix, where would it be?
Mm-hmm. I've got a pretty sweet tooth and always have done. And in my winemaking class, I was the youngest in my class going through Roseworthy, and the boys bought this thing called Kudit to dinner one night, and I loved it. It was really sweet and luscious, and that was my introduction to Sauterne. That was Coute. And so I'd say if I had to pick a region, it would be Sauterne.
How about a favorite landmark or natural habitat that no matter if you ever get to go back, you feel like you can get there with just the thought of it?
I've always big Elvis fan. I've always been a fan of American roots music and the blues, and because I travelled extensively to America over many years, I've been really fortunate to be able to jump in a rental car and explore the Mississippi Delta. So I'm very comfortable flying into Memphis. I'm very comfortable jumping in a car and an hour and a half later being 5 miles south of Clarksdale at the Shack Up Inn, and getting ready on a Wednesday night to go to Red's Juke Joint in the wrong side of the tracks in Clarksdale. So, I don't mind driving it. And in Australia, it's funny, you don't realise that when you're in Australia, you talk to someone and say, how far is it from Adelaide to Melbourne? And you say, oh, it's about a 10.5 hour drive. And you just don't, because of the distances, the tyranny of distance in this country, you just don't seem to mind that sort of driving. So jumping in a rental car in Memphis and heading down down through Mississippi is no big deal, you know. It's so because you've got a car, your country's built for it, and you just can go exploring. And as long as you've got a healthy dose of respect, you know, packed in your suitcase. And I've been taken to places that, you know, it's like being in a historical postcard one day, and it's like being in a film clip the next. It's been very good to me, your country.
Good. That's very comforting to hear, especially in these times right now.
Hey, what's my favorite 3 things about America? Oh gosh, I wouldn't be able to keep it to 3 things. I took a 6-day or 6-night ride on the Alaskan Marine Highway at the end in October last year on the ferry, and I ended up thinking I was a whale whisperer, because every time I'd go outside and sit on a bollard in my 8 layers of clothing, up would come this giant, huge behemoth of the deep and just sound and then go, and then there'd be a pot of dolphins. Or no, I've travelled 48 states. I got 2 to go, and no, I like a lot about your country.
So who has been your biggest mentor, motivator in the profession that you are in?
I'd have to say the 3 boys. You don't realise at the time that there's 3 pivotal moments in your career. The first one was when I was at Roseworthy College, and we had to complete a vintage to get our degree, and that was in 1983. And in the Barossa Valley, if you were a girl, pretty much your role in vintage at the winery was either in the laboratory, the weighbridge, the office, or cellar door. And I couldn't get a job for love nor money in the cellar in a winery pretty much anywhere in the state, actually. And I just honestly, I was 19 and just had no real idea those days about, you know, male dominant industries or anything really. I'd never struck it, you know, and I went to see my distillation teacher, Bob Baker, and he rang John Glaitzer, who'd just graduated from Roseworthy the year before and who'd got the job with Wolf Blass in a very small fledgling operation, much smaller than it ended up, you know, becoming. And he rang John and said, listen, can you just give this kid a job sweeping floors, unloading road tankers, anything, just so she can get a degree? And I didn't know that had happened for years later. And those days, Wolf Blass had all his reds crushed at Peter Lehman's winery Masterson and all his whites crushed at Doug Lehman's winery Bazados down in Tanunda. So they had to have a lot of road tankers bringing the juice back to Bilyara to finish fermentation. So John Glaitzer took me on for vintage and gave me a job unloading road tankers. And that lasted for about 2 weeks. And then he sent me down and I started looking after the pressing out at Masterson at Peter Lehman's, and then from there started looking after ferments on the ground and ended up doing a complete vintage. But if John hadn't taken that gamble on me back then, I would never have had a career. So John Glaitzer is really the first pivotal moment in my career. And then I was working in bottling in Sydney and came back to South Australia because my mum was very ill. And I got a job at Yalumba in the bottling section, but couldn't get a job in the winemaking team. They were all very good at what they were doing, quite young. So I took a big left turn and went to work at Rockford, which was this cult, under the radar, almost unknown winery with Robert O'Callaghan at the helm, and a mate of mine, Chris Ringland, who was in my class at winemaking school, who went on to become like winemaking superstar in Spain and Australia. And he said, hey, they're looking for someone in cellar door. And I said, oh, mate, I've never worked with the general public. I couldn't do that. And he said, just apply. So they used to send out a newsletter. Rob used to write this gorgeous newsletter. And I wrote a handwritten pamphlet that was the newsletter. And I wrote this complete newsletter from Rockford to their customers. And the feature story was Rob got his first Ferrari. And I sent that in as my job application. And I got the job, and they were cult unknown. And in the 3 years I was there, 93, 94, 95, they went from cult unknown to cult, the hottest thing in the Australian wine industry. And we had people like U2 and sports stars as our customers. And it was just the most extraordinary run. And Chris and Rob were making these amazing wines. And it was right after the vine pull, the South Australian vine pull, when to get over a perceived grape glut, the South Australian government gave growers the incentive to pay them to pull out their vines and not plant anything else, not plant any other grapevines for 10 years. So a lot of the old fortified grape varieties that had built the South Australian industry were pulled out, a lot of the sherry varieties, but also what was under threat was a lot of the old Grenache and Shiraz, Mataro that were around as well. And Rob O'Callaghan was one of those winemakers that went around and said, no, I'll take your fruit for 10 years if you leave it in the ground. So I was there when all that was going on, and it was just the most extraordinary place to be. And Robert was an extraordinary storyteller, yarn spinner, you know, one of the absolute custodians of the traditional keys of our industry. And, you know, 120-year-old wooden crusher, and salvaged the old Mintaro slate fermenters from the old Quiltala winery in Clare. You know, he was just one of these guys that you get a chance to meet once in a lifetime. And I was there for 3 years, and for a year on the bench, tasting bench, I was working alongside of him. So probably doing one of the most extraordinary apprenticeships ever, you know. So be Rob O'Callaghan and Rob Hill-Smith, when I went back to Yalumba to work for him in Celador and events, I got involved in their export side of the business, and he gave me the opportunity to travel 1 year, and, you know, just to let's see how it goes for a year job. So I threw myself into it, and just had a lot of good fortune and made some great relationships, and I started looking at people and press, consumers, corporate folk, restaurants, retailers, distributors as fortresses that could be built for the family business. And if you had enough fortresses that were on your side working with you, then you could build this great wall of Yalumba across the world, and it would keep everybody's mortgages safe. So that ended up being a really good strategy, and I ended up being in the job for 20 years. You know, the year I started, I was in New York, 9/11, and the year I finished, I was in London when that man went mental on London Bridge. So it was kind of like the two bookends, you know.
Wow.
So yeah, so those would be the three pivotal moments in my career, and the three people that have had this extraordinary influence. But I was also very lucky to be in a stellar winemaking class at Roseworthy College that had people like Chris Ringland and Rob Gibson and Rolfie Binder and Mike Brajkovic from Kumeu River in New Zealand, and Martin Shaw from Shaw and Smith, and Roger Harbord and Peter Barry from Clare. And I was and I was the youngest in the class, so I was kind of like had all these big brothers, and, you know, they've just always been there. So I've just been really fortunate, you know.
Yeah, that's a rock star class right there.
Sorry, long answer to a short question, really.
No.
Drew Noon down in Southern Wales. Brendan Darvanese went on to become a member of Parliament in Queensland. Yeah, it was pretty stellar year, you know. It was Rosie Butler from New Zealand. There was two girls in the class. So
I was gonna say it sounded like it was all males, but there were two women.
There's two of us. Rosie was from New Zealand. She already was in the wine industry, and she went back and married a geologist and lived happily ever after in the wine industry. And
So with all of that goodness that you had, your big brothers and all of that, what has been the most challenging experience professionally that you've had so far?
I think it would be once I really got into the traveling role, representing Yalumba internationally and domestically. You realise how much responsibility you've got, because a circuit of events is put together by distributors, by people in the trade, by sales reps, you know, and you know, you come to town, and if you deliver, if you do that right, then you make immediate sales, you make ambassadors for your brand, and you build solid foundations for business ongoing, not just for your house, but for your region and for your country. And that was something that really didn't land on me for a couple of years. That and we travel very well as a group here in the Barossa. You know, if we have that ethos that if the Barossa does well, everyone in the Barossa does well. And you don't realise that that's quite unique until you actually start travelling quite a bit, and you realise that there's a lot of wine regions of the world in France or Germany or Italy that don't do combined tastings, you know. And so, you know, that was something that was really important. I think the most difficult thing in my career has been to make sure that I had 100% strike rate. Every event that was planned, you know, was delivered, you know, and that's really how I looked at things, because, you know, when you're working for a family-owned business, you just can't afford to make any mistakes. Rob Hillsmith, who owns Yalumba, one evening at an event, it was a big picnic, massive picnic for Vintage Festival was the event that the winery was putting on. And we were there about 6 o'clock in the evening, and everything was set to go. And there was just myself and Rob standing there having, you know, just having a last minute checklist. And he said to me, you know, Ferrari, he said, really, we're in the business of agricultural entertainment. And I never forgot that. And I took that with me on the road. So, because there's only so many times you can go to the same place, to the same corporate tasting or wine dinner and say, well, this is the next vintage of the wine you saw last year. So besides talking about the wines, I started bringing to life a lot of the characters of the family and the region, and also the history that I find fascinating, and the way that things keep coming around all the time. You know, there's nothing truer said than that line in Battlestar Galactica where they say, what has happened before will happen again. You know, it's like COVID. This too will pass. It's one of those things. So I used to start, and I'm really interested where I was traveling. So I'd do a bit of research if I was going to Des Moines, Iowa, you know, and I'd know that it was the capital of pork and corn country. And I really got involved. And because I got involved, it seemed like people wanted to show you their world, which is how I ended up on a turkey shoot in Des Moines, Iowa, but in the Badlands of Iowa. And that's a whole nother experience, to be in camouflage from top to toe. But that's another story. So I think that was the most difficult thing, was to keep delivering at that level, to keep being that entertaining, informative but entertaining person that came to town and built those fortresses and consolidated those fortresses and looked after, you know, the reps, and dropped fairy dust on people when they needed it, you know, because people are doing hard yards at the coalface in the wine industry. Doesn't matter if you're a somm or a salesperson or the folk in charge of getting the wine out of the warehouse to the right spot at the right time, you know. So sometimes you just got to learn to drop a bit of fairy dust, you know, when you come to town. And sometimes that's a stop off at Dunkin' Donuts to buy someone a thermos and a $20 voucher to buy as many donuts as they can eat in a week. And sometimes it's, hey, you know, when we finish tonight, we finish at 11 o'clock tonight, and we're in Los Angeles, and, you know, Muzzo and Frank's on Hollywood Boulevard opened in 1928, and the guys behind the bar there were there when they opened. Let's go there and this is our last night in America. Let's go there and have a cosmopolitan, you know, and let's pretend it's 90 years ago and it's the golden age of Hollywood. And we end up a couple of zillionaires with us and bar hopping in Hollywood Boulevard and ending up at Pink's Hot Dogs at 3 o'clock in the morning before flying out the next day. And that's the good stuff. So that was the biggest challenge, was to be able to come to town and deliver for
You
my
do it with
house,
ease.
for my house and for my region and for my country, you know?
Yeah. And you know, that is something that is, you know, a hospitality sort of gift that not everybody can flow with that easily. But yes, it does take a lot of work and it takes a lot of energy on your part. So again, another thank you for being that person, because, you know, it's kind of like when a sales rep would come into the restaurant and they're trying to have me taste something that's already on my wine list on the BTG and they didn't even know it. You know, it's those little tiny things that show that you actually are involved and you're invested, not just because you want to make the mortgage payments or, you know, you are doing it because that's a part of who you are. It's a part of your being. So, and you do it without seemingly not, you know, it looks like you're having a great time doing it. So that's a bonus, I would think. So before we kind of get into a lot of the fun things that you get to do, like the turkeys and camouflage and all this other stuff that people invite you to do, let's talk about the Barossa Valley, because I wanted to show people different areas of Australia, not just what people expect or have thought the region produces. You know, hopefully whoever is watching this maybe find something new and exciting out by hearing what you have to say about it. So I'm going to let you take it.
I think it's funny, you know, sometimes you don't realize that, you know what you know. I think the best thing about the Barossa for me has been to go back into the history of the place. And, you know, you talk about people making new and exciting discoveries. One of the best discoveries that I've been able to take, not only to people in the international arena, but even to people in Australia, is this story of the origins of our industry that most folks, you know, are unaware of. And by when Australia was colonised, and let's not get too far into that can of worms, because that's a situation that we're still dealing with in this country, and not particularly well. But when we were colonised by the English as a penal colony, and everything nasty that went with that, it wasn't terribly long until Australia turned into this extraordinary agricultural powerhouse for the British Empire. And as we got into that, and we got into the Industrial Revolution in England, they realised, the powers that be in England realised that not only were we an agricultural powerhouse, but everywhere that you stuck a shovel in the ground, you found something valuable. Whether it was gold, we had a gold rush in Victoria, but it was coal, and there was all this coal in New South Wales. So they sent out a Scottish mining engineer in 1832 to open up the coalfields of New South Wales. And lucky for us in the wine industry that his son, who just finished viticulture, came out with him. Well, the whole family emigrated, actually. And he realised that Australia had great potential. Well, the parts of New South Wales that he saw had great potential for grapes and wine. So he went straight back to the old world of France, Portugal and Spain, and he proceeded to collect 500 or 600 varieties of grapes. And he kept a really detailed diary while he was doing that. And he systematically brought those grapes back into Australia in sandboxes on penal ships and also on free settler ships. So he sets up this grape repository in New South Wales and starts a school of enology and viticulture. And long story short, it goes well until he decides he wants to be a politician, and in Australia couldn't get a gig. So he goes to New Zealand and becomes quite pivotal in something called the Treaty of Waitangi. But that repository of grapevines goes to the Sydney Botanic Gardens, which then gets transferred down to the Adelaide Botanic Gardens, where South Australia gets opened up. And what we have there that arrives in South Australia, also the MacArthur family, who brought merino sheep to Australia, imported grapevines as well. And they imported them before phylloxera devastated the European arena in the late 1800s. So today is today, without going into a great deal of interesting history, today is today in Australia, in regions like the Barossa, like McLaren Vale, like Clare, over in the Goulburn Valley, up in the Hunter Valley, we've got these grapevines that are over 120 years old on their own roots. So you've got this extraordinary viticultural treasure trove that only exists in Australia of these varieties like Grenache, Shiraz, Mataro, Riesling, Touriga, Tintacao, Pedro. And this most extraordinary palette that we get to work with as winemakers and grape growers. And it's this kind of extraordinary thing that we have that a lot of folks don't even know about. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, when we're talking about, when I was taking Yolumba's Kaylee Cabernet Shiraz combination, which is Old Australian Claret, when I'm taking that to the Mandarin Oriental in London, to Daniel Ballou's Cafe Ballou casual operation, and I'm faced with 20 seated sommeliers, all male, English, Belgian, French, Italian, and German. And I'm telling this story that when you know, a young lad said, I was showing them the Kaylee, and he said, but most of my drinkers are Bordeaux drinkers, so why would they like this wine? And I'm like, well, because the Cabernet goes straight back to Bordeaux. The Shiraz goes straight back to Hermitage. Back in the day, in Busby's diary, he says, when I'm talking to one of the bankers and owners of Shiraz from the Hill of Hermitage, he says, well, we send all our best Shiraz to Bordeaux to mix with their Cabernet, and this is 1833. So I said, this Cabernet in this wine goes straight back to Bordeaux. The Shiraz is planted in 1901. The Federation of Australia goes straight back to Hermitage. Back in the day, before appellation was handed down in Bordeaux, they used to mix Shiraz and Cabernet. That was what they did because they were complementary. So all of those great wines are a mixture of Cabernet and Shiraz, which is exactly what we're doing today. And Chateau Palmer put out a tribute wine where they made a tribute to the pre-appellation styles. They couldn't put their name on it because it was outside appellation, but it was $600 a bottle and sold out overnight. Yep. So I said, technically speaking, we're doing what Bordeaux used to do and what they would do if they could do, but they can't. And the sommeliers looked at me and they said, why don't we know this story? And I said, that's a really good question. Why don't we tell that story? So I think that's probably the best thing about the Barossa. We have this extraordinary thing to work with, and we have about 13 unofficial sub-regions to our Barossa region, which encompasses the valley floor, the Barossa Valley floor and the Eden Valley High Country, different by about 3 weeks ripening with the cooler evenings up in the High Country. And we have this extraordinary 13 sub-regions by soil and microclimate that define themselves. And we're working with things that are from this viticultural treasure trove. And, you know, that's where, in my opinion, the Barossa story starts, under the ground, what's coming up.
Yeah. Now, are you a proponent of those sub-regions becoming official?
Oh, look, I would love to see it, because why we don't talk more about terroir in this country, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Because that definitely exists. The expression, I mean, Barossa is known worldwide for Shiraz, but there's so many expressions of Shiraz within the region, you know. Coonawarra is known for Cabernet. There's so many expressions of Cabernet within Coonawarra. McLaren Vale and the Barossa are known for Grenache. You know, it's always been a bit of a poor relation to Shiraz, but Grenache from some of these regions, I would challenge some of the Pinot makers. You know, some of them are just extraordinary. Riesling, the expressions of Riesling that vary here in our Eden Valley Riesling, and then an hour and a half up the road, the expression is different for the Watervale Rieslings, but within the Watervale Rieslings, there's variation. So I would love to see us talk a little bit more about terroir, and I'd love to see a little bit more of that delineation of those sub-regions.
Mostly everybody considered Australia wines to be all one thing. They didn't even know what the grape was at a time. Everything was, this is an Australian wine. And I think now, especially with people getting to go and travel there with different groups, like Wines of Australia has been great. The Busby travel tours have been awesome. To kind of get the people that are trying to buy and sell the wines, get a glimpse of, oh, holy shit, this really is that different. And there are that many different expressions. And getting those wines actually out of Australia into our hands, I think has opened up the consumer's eyes a little more. So I think it would be great to see some regional sort of focus on the label. So we kind of discussed a little bit about what's going on in the world, and it's chaotic, and it's scary, and it's intense. But you know, I think what you did mention earlier about still, you know, that everyday habit that you have of going out and standing on the earth and rooting yourself down and being appreciative of being above the ground is a wonderful thing. Has there been any other effect of this pandemic to your professional lifestyle, and have you adjusted greatly due to it?
Oh, massively. I had actually resigned from Yalumba in January, and I had an extraordinary year where I cherry-picked some fantastic events in America, New Zealand, and Australia. And I was going to have a pretty leisurely year starting to wind down. And I was going to set myself up as a contractor, independent contractor. And fortunately, Yalumba had already put some really interesting projects aside for me. And I was going to have a pretty amazing year. And then literally in the space of 3 weeks, that just evaporated. And I spent quite a bit of money. I spent my savings last year on a holiday, you know, where I went to Alaska and I went to the Whiskey Island of Islay in Scotland. So I was kind of in a pretty dire spot, I'll be honest with you. But I'm really fortunate because I have a really lovely block of land up in the Barossa Valley, and I'd paid it out a couple of years ago, so I didn't have a mortgage. So I thought, oh well, time to start planting vegetables, get some chooks, and you know, I'll start writing up all those stories that I always wanted to write, and I'll put them on a website, and I'll have a subscription. And that's how I'll make enough money to pay the payments on my car and you know, and pay the bills. And that's kind of where I started. And then and I had a couple of contracts for Yalumba, and retail went pretty well in Australia. On premise went really was restricted badly at the start, but there's been some pretty amazing success stories where restaurants have actually swung straight across to takeout with single bottle sales as well. Mm-hmm. But largely it was the retail sector that kept wine flowing in this part of the world. And then word got around that I'd you know, resigned and was, you know, available. And as Chris Ringland said, I'm like Switzerland, I'm neutral now. So whatever anyone came up with, I said yes. So I ended up teaching brand ambassador skills and strategies in one direction, writing wine notes for websites in another direction, new releases. I started a Zoomy wine chat show with a lass who said, do you want to have a chat? I'm like, yep. Now we're in season 2 of What Was I Drinking? And we've got John and Tim DeVal this week. I mean, we've got all the stellar talent. And then a couple of other wine labels, Jim Barry wanted some work done, and a lovely little sheep not little, a lovely sheep breeding property out the back of Anguston, Hutton Vale, said to me, listen, you know, come and have a chat. And it turns out they've got this extraordinary story where they planted Mount Eddleston in 1912. And then because the chap who was running the family business at the time for the Angus family got ill, they sold the vineyard to their neighbour, which happened to be the Henschke family, who went on to take it to great heights. But meanwhile, back at Hutton Vale, they've taken a whole dose of cuttings and planted their own 8-acre vineyard. So they're making Shiraz in the back blocks.
And that's beautiful property. Oh my God.
And that beautiful property. And so what we've done is we've platted the sheep here and the wine making here. And so now we've got these little moments like Budburst Best Pasture, where we're doing little events and showing that world to the world. So, you know, I've been really fortunate, and now they're putting a boutique hotel, 138 rooms, in Adelaide, in the Adelaide Oval, which is an iconic cricket sporting, it's an iconic sports arena for Australia. It's where they've played great cricket for over 100 years, and Sir Donald Bradman, that was his home pitch. And it'd be like the story of Babe Ruth playing at Yankee Stadium. Sir Donald Bradman played at Adelaide Oval, and they've put this 138-room hotel into the confines of the Oval, and there's a little puppy dog that lives in the foyer, and they've got a restaurant that they're going to open called 5 Regions, because we have 5 wine regions in South Australia: Coonawarra, Clare, McLaren Vale, Adelaide Hills, and Barossa. So for 2 months of the year, that restaurant is going to have the wine and food personality of that region, with feature events and flights. And so I've just been taken on as a consultant to help curate that personality and host some of the events, and be a bit of an ambassador for the place. So I'm pretty excited. And so out of the ashes, as they say, you know, out of the ashes of a rubbish year, you know, and meanwhile, I got broad beans coming in by the pound. The broccoli's just finished. I'm making 8 egg frittatas once a week from the chooks, and I'm making double batches of honey crackles, and you know, spending a lot more time with people I actually know. It's been tremendous. It's a relief, and it's really not too bad now. You know, but I'm extremely thankful for the work that's coming my way. It's you know, it's tough for a lot of folks, and I'm very mindful. So I don't go anywhere without something under my arm, you know, whether it's honey crackles or frittata, or, you know, a bag of broad beans, or half a dozen eggs. You know, it's little things, but it makes a lot of difference. It's fairy dust, you know.
Yes, that fairy dust. Now your family is of Italian heritage, like Southern Italy, correct? Or is it?
No, my father. Yeah, my father's from Liguria, from a little town called Lerici, and my mum was from Adelaide. So, okay. Yeah, I grew up in an Italian-Australian household. Yep.
Now, how is that?
Oh, it's pretty interesting when you got salami sandwiches at school in Alice Springs. But it was, there was a fairly big Italian community in Alice Springs. I mean, there still is. So,
can you just explain where that is for people who might
not? Alice Springs is, if you put a map of Australia, superimpose it over a map of America, Alice Springs is roughly where Des Moines, Iowa is. Right in the, oh no, it's a bit lower than that actually. Be roughly where probably Dallas, Texas.
Okay.
Roughly in the middle of the country, and it's about 200 miles from Uluru, which is also used to be known as Ayers Rock. So it's right in the centre of the country. They call it the Red Centre. A lot of the dirt around there is like a bright red sand, and there's a range of range of hills there, not so much mountains but hills, called the McDonald Ranges, but just right where Alice Springs is. And there's a whole series of water courses through there, and the Aboriginal folk call that area Yeparinya country, because it's like caterpillar country. So when you're up in a plane, or when you're at different points around the area, the McDonald's look like giant caterpillars, actually. So they call it Yeparinya country. So
I will not try and repeat that word just yet.
Sorry?
I'll try to repeat that word at another time.
Well, the local shopping centre is called Yeparinya, so it's not hard to get around. But that's it's Albert Namatjira country, and he is a very famous Aboriginal painter, watercolours. So it's it's beautiful country. Yeah, big wide open.
So what else, if you're, I think I've kept you for so much longer than I should have been allowed to, but you're just fascinating, and I'm catching my breath now because I've been holding it this whole time. What is something else that you would want to share? And I know, since you are a communicator and a storyteller, and I've had the actual fortune of listening to you by a real campfire, but what's something that you would want to share with everybody here about yourself, about Jane Ferrari? Besides that, you'd be royal deep blue.
Probably, I think just, if anything, I'm more than the wine, fascinated by the history now. I remember going to an interview with who I thought was a journalist in Dublin, in Ireland, and I had to get all dressed up because the interview was at an old club on St. Stephen's Green, which, if you've ever been to Dublin, it's right in the heart of the city, and not very far to the sort of pubs area, and but it's St. Stephen's Green is the really big park, the central park of Dublin. Anyway, there's these lovely old clubs, gentlemen's clubs on there, and I had to meet him at this club, and it was Dr. So-and-so, so I thought he was a medical doctor. Anyway, I got there all dressed up, and we sat down for lunch, and I said, so, Dr. So-and-so, and I never Google people beforehand, I've learnt that. And I'm always in for a free consult, especially if they're, back specialists. I got a crook back. And I said, so, what are you a doctor of, just in case I can get a bit of a free consult? And he said, oh no, he said, I'm a PhD doctor. And he turned out to be the #1 investigative journalist for the equivalent in Ireland of PBS in America, or the ABC or the BBC. And I'm like, oh, really? He goes, yeah. He said, and I said, oh, you might be interested then. And I started telling him about this intrepid traveller that was part of the family at Yalumba, the current Robert Hillsmith. Robert and Sam are the two brothers that own Yalumba at the minute. And Robert and Sam's grandfather's elder brother was like the Indiana Jones horticulturalist of Yalumba. And he was sent away at the age of 29 to travel for 2 years, 1893, 1894, around the British Empire and America, to get as much knowledge about winemaking, grape growing, fruit, because we had fruit orchards and a fruit canning business as well, and a jam making business. So he was sent on this 2-year fact-finding tour, and to build business for the company. And he sent 30 to 50-page letters home every second day to his father. And those letters were lost until 1999. And they were found when they swung the staircase round at Yalumba in the clock tower, big old building. And the historian Viv McKenna was given this boxes of letters. And they were, the family didn't even know they existed. And I read the 5 volumes, and I used to tell stories about this guy wherever I was traveling. So if I was in London, I'd tell a story about Fred in London. If I was in Dublin, I'd tell a story about Fred Cayley-Smith in Dublin, because his letters are just gorgeous, you know, it's unbelievable. Anyway, we started talking about that, and this guy, this journalist stopped me dead, and he said, you know, he said, you're a charlatan. I said, excuse me? He said, you're not a winemaker, wine person at all. I said, excuse me? He goes, you're a historian. And I was like, oh, I am.
He ended it nicely.
And,
That's about.
yeah. And then he proceeded to tell me about the project that he was working on. And he'd been over to Berlin when the fall of the Berlin Wall was on. And he was over there ostensibly to cover the fall of the Berlin Wall. But in actual fact, he was there for a completely different reason. He was there because he'd been given a small but definite window of opportunity to talk to the East German authorities, let's just call it, to investigate the relationship between Ireland and Germany before the Second World War.
Wow.
And he was writing a book on that relationship. So we ended up talking a little bit about wine and a lot about world history. And so that would be, if there was any like secret behind the scenes moment, it would be, you know, the history of it. And so when it comes to traveling your country, I've tried every time I go to your country or any other country, I try and do a book or a play and live it. So when I was working in Georgia, I took my weekend in Savannah and did Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, and had no idea that it was a true story. And little old historical lady at the cemetery on a Sunday morning was telling me all sorts of stories, and then I went from there. So yeah, it would be I like to try and live the history where you can. So,
Awesome. Well, I think that you make history, you know, I think it's fascinating as well, but I know that it's a chore for some people to learn history about anywhere, even about their own self. But I think you make it enjoyable, approachable, and stimulating. And it's a very visual, textural almost experience when you're speaking about things. So
thank you very much. It's very nice.
Awesome. And hence all of your accolades for being a communicator and such, and storyteller. Before we end, though, if you had only 10 minutes and only one glass of wine, what would that glass of wine be, and who would you share it with?
Oh, I don't really have to hesitate. When I was a kid on tour at Roseworthy College, my first ever wine tour, I'm 18 years old. We go to Bailey's of Bundarra and we meet a winemaker called Harry James Tinson. And he made some of the most phenomenal muskets and Tokay's fortified wines, which is what our industry was built on in the early days. And that was where I got for the first time that a bottle of wine can actually be a time capsule and is actually liquid history. And it would be a bottle of, and he used to make the pick of the house musket in a dump fortified screw cap bottle, you know, $8 I think it was a bottle those days. And now that sort of stuff is legendary. And it was his name was Harry James Tinson, and the wine was HJT Muscat from Bailey's of Bundarra. And if I had to share it,
I mean, you don't have to.
If I had to share it, it'd be, and you know, I do have actually the emotional depth of a rain puddle. It would be with someone like Elvis or Derek Jeter, or, you know, yeah, someone like
Elvis
that.
or Derek Jeter. All right.
Or maybe, you know, the guys from Creedence Clearwater Revival, or maybe the guys from Cold Chisel, a band that used to play around the pubs when I was a kid. You know, all those legendary blokes that you never, ever going to really talk to, but, you know, always want to. Yeah.
And you know, so that brings up, we didn't really hear you talk about yourself too much. You talked about everyone else, which is okay because that's what you do.
The job.
That is,
That's the
yes,
job.
you are. But yes, you also are a musician, right?
Very
Uh-huh.
bad one. I got 3 chords, I think.
That's 3 more than I do, so that's awesome.
It's, you know, like I said, emotional depth of a rain puddle, really. I've just had a great gig with good material. We have the great fortune to have everything here from very small snowfields to tropical rainforest. And I just hope we're smart enough to keep some of that in the condition, that it's in. You can't, you can't, I don't want to be controversial, but at the end of the day, you can't breathe and eat stuff that you dig out of the ground, or, you know, you got to keep some sort of balance. And we have some extraordinary places and habitats in this country. And from the Great Barrier Reef to the wilderness of Tasmania to the deserts of the Northern Territory and Western Australia. And, I've been to a place called Dolphin Beach, which is literally, 5 hours drive from here on the bottom of the Yorke Peninsula. And I've seen dolphins surf in on the waves, and the beach is a mile long. And if you're in any other part of the world, it'd probably be covered in beach umbrellas and stuff. And we've just got the most extraordinary places. And I just hope we're smart enough to keep a few of them nice and tidy.
I know the rest of the world's gonna love this, and
I hope so.
well, they better, right? Um, but from myself, from Summation Live, and I just want to say thank you. We thank you, and we appreciate your time and energy. And I am going to wish you all of the best in all the things that are happening for you. I'm glad that the breath is coming a little more with hope and a positive flow now. And I hope it continues upwards for you. So. Hi friends, thank you again for joining us in the More Than Somm Down Under series. So excited that you were able to share with us on this journey. My name's Kat Thomas with Core Body and Mind, and we are in collaboration with the badass crew over at Summation Live. So if you want to find out some more clues and how to be in the Down Under with us during this month, check out at Summation Live on Instagram or at Wine Goddess LV.